So, welcome back to our symposium on how AI is changing art in the humanities and to what ends. And this panel is the one on ethical and legal implications. I'm sure there are many things discussed, but those are some of the highlights of this panel. And I'll turn it over to Zach Zimmer, and I'll just read you for the live stream people his bio. So Zach Zimmer co-facilitates the Ethics and Astrobiology Reading Group, part of University of California, Santa Cruz's Astrobiology Initiative in the Literature Department. And he teaches classes on Latin American literature, science fiction, ethics and technology, and the poetics of California infrastructure. His research explores questions of literature, aesthetics, politics, and technology in the Americas. So, and I might as well just introduce the other people. We also have Atreya Mathur, who is Director of Legal Research at the Center for Art Law. She is a Master of Laws graduate from NYU School of Law, and where she specialized in competition, innovation, information law, with a focus on copyright, intellectual property, and art law. And she'll be talking about the latter, I believe. And Todd Brous, is it okay. Todd Brous is an entrepreneur, consultant, public speaker, strategist, educator, and artist with over 2 decades of experience in guiding businesses from startups to Fortune 500 companies through the intricacies of technology and innovation. His expertise spans AI, machine learning, natural language processing, data analytics, data transformation, and business leadership. So that this is the only time we'll hear from that side in this seminar. And then our moderator, Johanna Devaney, is the co-editor-in-chief of the Journal of New Music Research, and her research on computational methods for audio understanding has been funded by the NEH, Digital Humanities Program, and the National Science Foundation. So I turn it over to Zach, who's on the screen.
Hi, thank you, everyone. I'm going to put up a presentation. Great. Okay. So this is part of a larger paper that hopefully will be coming out soon, but this is a bit of a preview. The context collapse, the Enron corpus, and foundation model training data sets. Without training data, there is no artificial intelligence. That truism has been repeated so frequently that it is now an industry mantra. But where does training data come from? There have been several recent attempts to tell the history of specific training sets, focusing on the massive publicly available data sets like the Common Crawl, used to build many of the large language models, or LLMs, that we've been experimenting with in the last few years. These training data sets are huge. Common Crawl indexes over 2 billion web pages, and yet they are proving incapable of satisfying the generative AI industry's voracious demand for new data to train their next generation algorithms, which include hundreds of billions of parameters. And so it might seem quaint to remind ourselves that in the early 21st century, a data set made up of a mere 500,000 email messages could represent a paradigm-shifting development in the world of natural language processing, or NLP. The Enron corpus is just one such data set. A large collection of some 500,000 internal Enron emails released to the public by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or the FERC, in the wake of the prosecution of Enron's fraudulent business practices. The FERC argued that they released the emails in the interest of transparency and justice, but now we would call what they did doxing. Nevertheless, that decision generated one of the largest freely accessible bodies of natural, authentic human email communication in English on the early internet. The Enron corpus quickly became the standard archive for many computer science machine learning courses and the basis for all kinds of algorithmic processes. That means that once computer science figures out how to bring a concept of history into artificial intelligence, the Enron corpus will be a prime candidate to be deemed the last universal common ancestor, or the LUCA, of NLP training sets. I wish I was in the room with you right now to see if people have actually worked with the Enron corpus, but this might be news to some of you, but I'm sure that there are people familiar with the history of computational linguistics who know this corpus very well and know the role that it has played in the field. But I imagine for some other people in the audience, the mere mention of the name Enron will conjure up feelings of rage, disgust, and shame. I know this all too well. In presenting this research at San Francisco's Commonwealth Club, my name check of the crooked E elicited mass hisses from the audience. What I didn't remember at the time was that the Commonwealth Club was the very venue where, on June 22nd, 2001, Enron CEO Jeffrey Skilling confronted an angry crowd of Californians who had lived through a year of rolling blackouts and exorbitant energy prices. As the Houston Chronicle reported at the time, a Houston energy executive got more than boos and jeers before starting a speech on California's energy crisis. He got a pie in the face. It is, please don't pie me right now, but it is indeed disconcerting to learn that several 100,000 emails exchanged between Enron executives and their contacts during the unfolding of a generationally catastrophic corporate collapse might be, in terms of historical data sets, the last universal common ancestor of all neural network-based generative AI algorithms. But it's true. All spam filters owe a genealogical debt to the archive, as Finn Brunton documents in his book Spam, A Shadow History of the Internet. Brunton described the corpus as a remarkable object, data, quote, frozen in place like the ruins of Pompeii for future researchers. Brunton continues, as a human document, it has the skeleton of a great, if pathetic, novel, a saga of nepotism, venality, arrogant posturing, office politics, stock deals, wedding contractors, and Texas strip clubs played out over hundreds of thousands of messages. Brunton's challenge to reimagine the Enron corpus as a novel or perhaps a Netflix series is helpful in reminding us that beyond its status as a historically important corpus for the early 21st century breakthroughs in natural language processing, the Enron corpus is also a public record of the entire bureaucratic functioning of the email system of one of the most emblematic corporations of postmodern capitalism. And it is only available because it was used as evidence in the criminal prosecution of what then was the largest corporate bankruptcy in the history of the United States. In this, it is something of an outlier, the public record of corporate fraud that was actually punished. As Mimi Onuoha has explained, this is the rarest kind of data set, one that reflects the inner workings of powerful people, full of information that those powerful people vigorously wanted to keep secret. And yet, against all odds, the Enron corpus exists and betrays the wrongdoing of executives who are skilled in specifically covering up that kind of behavior. This, then, is the Enron corpus, a potential foundation model training corpus LUCA, or last universal common ancestor, as you can see from this image from Darwin's journals. It is at once exemplary and unique, a representative sample that is also an outlier. Although in its heyday it was once the largest thing of its kind, it is now a mere toy lost within billion-parameter internet-scale foundation models. This leads to an important question, at least in my opinion. How much is the Enron corpus still with us today? Is it possible to trace the Enron corpus's socio-technical fingerprint, as feminist scholars of science would say? Some excellent reporting confirms that the Enron emails are statistically significant domains in most of the massive training corpora, which means the Enron corpus is represented in some, if not all, of the name brand foundation model training sets. We don't know because they're kept as proprietary trade secrets. Yet, the fact of its inclusion cannot capture or convey what these data sets feel like, what it truly means to be an intelligence trained on the Enron archive. Beyond simple recognition of its presence, is it possible to perceive the social fingerprints of the corpus? Can we find a way to feel what we now know is in there? In order to investigate further, we need to shift the aesthetic realm. There we can find artists who engage the problem of training data with creativity and approach these technosystems through an experimental practice. It was Everest Pipkin's lacework from 2020 that helped me understand what it would mean for a human being to actually experience a training corpus as a machine might, but I'm not going to talk about lacework today. And I would quickly supplement lacework with several other artists who attempt in some form to actually read a canonical corpus, including Adam Harvey and Jules Laplace's Exposing AI project, James Bridle's performances, Kate Crawford and Trevor Paglin's Excavating AI, Mimi Onuoha's The Library of Missing Datasets, and other sites like Training the Archive, Have I Been Trained, and Knowing Machines. It just so happens that many of those artists gathered in New York City in 2017 to celebrate the launch of Sam Levine and Tiga Brain's The Good Life Enron Simulator. The Good Life is a masterpiece of email art, but more important for the current focus, it provides a barely human-readable experience of the Enron archive. In short, The Good Life is an inbox reenactment of the Enron corpus. The artist further cleaned the Enron corpus down to about 225,000 emails, and at enron.email, which is still operational, you can sign up to receive all of the messages from the corpus in chronological order. As the artists have said, it is an experiential opportunity to relive the Enron collapse blow by blow. Their original idea was to speed run the Enron corpus over 24 hours, beginning immediately whenever someone entered their email address into the website, as you see on the screen. But this proved impossible, as the very spam filters whose technical genealogy relied on the Enron corpus categorically shut down the project before a single email was ever delivered. So they needed to space them out a bit more. The volume of messages also proved to be unworkable in the real time span of the 3 years in which they were sent. So the artist settled on several options ranging from 7 years, or about double the 3.5 years of messages contained in the archive, to 28 years, which is the longest simulation of the Good Life, averaging to about 49 emails a day. But instead of signing yourself up for the Good Life, the Enron simulator, I recommend watching that panel discussion from 2017, The Making of Natural Language, an Evening with the Enron Archive, which is perfect and more than sufficient for catching the feeling of Enron's socio-technical fingerprint. But it doesn't force you into email bankruptcy, because this will, among other things, destroy your own email inbox. In this presentation, Finn Brunton situates that socio-technical fingerprint within a particular culture. He says it's not just Texan, but Houstonian, and not just corporate, but a very specific kind of Houstonian, fratty, evangelical, financial arbitrage corporate culture. This is the turn of the century Houston that Mimi Schwartz, in her reporting on the Enron collapse, described as a postmodern wildcatter's dream. And in Houston today, Enron is still remembered as the criminal enterprise that betrayed a generation of workers while robbing them of their savings. Enron is also emblematic of a phrase that today has become associated with generative AI model collapse, bot shit, AI slop, and other terrors of the anti-memetic internet. The idea of something poisoned by the projection of its own reality. Poisoned by the projection of its own reality is the image of Enron that emerges from The Smartest Guys in the Room, Bethany McLean and Peter Elkin's definitive history of the company's collapse, Alex Gibney's documentary based on the book, also called The Smartest Guys in the Room, concisely introduces Enron as the dark shadow of the American dream. What the Good Life Enron simulator helped me understand is the strange and convoluted way in which that epochal fraud perpetuated by Enron has become hard-coded into the AI mind. It does not answer the statistical question about the weight of the Enron corpus in any foundation model, but it rather reframes the question entirely. How much can a single data set impact a model if the data itself is a poison projection of reality? In other words, is Enron just an outlier? Only a handful of the 1.6 million emails that were originally in the Enron archive were used in Burke's trial, in what the defendants surely argued were non-representative outliers. Yet today, the true outlier is that Enron's executives were convicted and that Arthur Andersen, the accounting consulting firm that enabled the fraud, got the corporate death penalty. In the age of too big to fail and too big to jail, the closure and accountability in the Enron case seemed like something special, almost too good to be true. If I have waited this long to mention Arthur Andersen, it is only because the emails that led to that disgraced accounting firm's collapse were not represented in the Enron corpus. Arthur Andersen existed in what Cory Doctorow calls the consulting accounting continuum. It was a storied accounting firm with almost a century of industry experience, but its Houston office had become deeply implicated in Enron's fraudulent accounting practices, with in-house consultants advising Enron how to persuade the accounting side to sign off on Enron's speculative balance sheets. Even though it was an email sent to David Duncan, the lead Arthur Andersen partner on the Enron account, that led to the firm's conviction of obstructing justice, that was an internal email to Arthur Andersen's in-house counsel, so it never touched the Enron.com domain. This brings up the final and most inconvenient aspect of the Enron corpus. Even the original 1.6 million message archive was incomplete. This is not some metaphysical point about the inherent incompleteness of any archive, nor is it a scholastic argument about the paradox of measurement. The Enron corpus is incomplete because Enron employees, along with their accounting counterparts at Arthur Andersen, deliberately destroyed evidence of wrongdoing, both in physical and in digital form. In the mid-October 2001 weeks leading to the inevitable subpoena of Enron's records, the document shredders at Enron's corporate company headquarters continued to run non-stop. Enron's subpoena arrived on October 25th, 2001, but the company continued shredding documents, sometimes at the rate of 7,000 pounds an hour, until late January of 2002. Across the way, still in Houston, Arthur Andersen employees were deleting their own emails and shredding their own documents. The firm deleted 30,000 computer files and shredded an extra 2,000 pounds of documents in the 2 weeks between when Enron publicly acknowledged it was the target of a federal investigation and when Arthur Andersen received their own subpoena for records on November 8, 2001. We know this in part because of an email written by one of Arthur Andersen's in-house attorneys called Nancy Temple. In the full article version of this argument, I talk a lot about this email, which communicated the opposite of how it reads, and I think about what that kind of ambiguity means for these generative large language models. Temple's colleagues would later testify under oath that the email was coded instruction to destroy the evidence that everyone knew would be subpoenaed in the immediate future. The email's coded nature presents a particularly interesting example of the role in human interpretation and written communication. This, in its entirety, is the October 12, 2001 message. Mike, it might be useful to consider reminding the engagement team of our document and retention policy. It will be helpful to make sure that we have complied with the policy. Let me know if you have any questions, Nancy. Former Enron employees testified that they interpreted this reminder of the firm's document retention policy to mean save what's important, destroy everything else, i.e. any incriminating evidence. During Arthur Andersen's trial for obstruction of justice, the October 12th email was considered a smoking gun, documentary proof of Andersen's cover-up of the crime fraud that they enabled Enron to pursue. There's more complications in this story, but I'm cutting it out in the interest of time, and I'll move towards my conclusion. Although it is an important point that Nancy Temple's emails are not part of the Enron corpus, my overall argument has not focused on the missing piece in a foundation model training set, a theme that has been explored by Mimi Onuoha and other artists like the ones I cited above. I have proposed a distinct yet related question. How distributed are the effects of a digital space poisoned with the projection of its own reality? Can we somehow feel the corruption of Enron pulsing through the technosystem? Sam Levine and Tiga Brain created a modality to experience the corpus, and the Good Life Enron simulator provided a direct perceptual experience of the ghost of Enron spread across our social machine. The work's true revelation, which I also hope to have at least touched on in this presentation, is the depth to which Enron has penetrated into the ontological structures of the AI mind. So in the full article version of what I'm presenting to you today, I explore why the 2002 Enron collapse resonates so powerful with our contemporary moment, in which generative AI algorithms are threatened by an emergent phenomenon known as foundation model collapse. And I really think that anxiety is what was behind the visceral reaction of my audience at the Commonwealth Club, the disgust they expressed when I mentioned the crooked E. Nobody wants the ingredients of those first early foundation algorithmic sausages to have been the toxic slop of turn-of-the-century neoliberal globalization. And we don't want this because we know viscerally that ethics manifest themselves in the building of these systems. There is no additive ethics poured into these systems as lubricant after they've been manufactured. The ethics will always be the reflection of how these systems were built. GIGO, as the coders say, garbage in, garbage out. Enron's story has urgent resonances today. It is the story, if you'll permit me a bit of a leading summary, of a fraudulent business model based on the speculative trading of extractive rents, which cooked its books with bullshit that everyone pretended to have read. The most charitable interpretation of the Enron fraudsters is that they were visionaries ahead of their time. But they were not content to invest in their own capacity to realize their vision. Rather, they sold speculative shares in the promise that they would realize their vision in the future. They then securitized those promises and shed them off their balance sheets systematically and clandestinely until they could do it no more. My hope is that in confronting this truth, we can become a bit more sanguine about the generative AI technosystem self-replicating all around us, at least as those models collapse and converge onto a point of botshit singularity. The models at that point will be speaking from somewhere. It is my hope, however, that we can find a better ground on which to generate our future intelligences than on the smoldering crater of Enron's context collapse. Thank you very much.
So I was curious if you'd looked into how this has been evaluated, right? Like the actual presence of Enron, like what kind of queries, what kind of testing has been done?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, so I showed a few images from reporting in the Atlantic magazine by Alex Reisner and an investigative series in the Washington Post about the C4, the crawled clean colossal corpus based on the common crawl. And both of those have documented that the enron.com domain is a statistically significant portion of the training corpora, but these are very, very small amounts. So they're there. Those are the publicly available large training sets for the models, like the open source models. We don't have access to the proprietary models, but we do know that they, especially like the early, like GPT-3, GPT 3.5, really tracked the common crawl and, Lion 5B and these other image or text training sets. So it's definitely there in any set that we've been able to look at, and it's a fundamental component of these scrapes of what we might call like the legacy internet. And really what I was trying to get at is even if it's a tiny percentage, it does feel like it has an outsized effect in how these systems operate. Thank you for the question.
Thank you. Any other?
Hi, thank you for your talk. That was super interesting. And I have a question, maybe more related to the experience of talking to one of these chatbots in the present day. Just wondering if by any chance you have found like any telltale signs of that particular data set in the way that let's say a chatbot like ChatGPT would communicate with people, or a specific rhetoric that somehow has infused the interactive experience with an AI chatbot.
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's a hard question to answer because anytime you get specific enough in the queries, you're basically like directing the model towards the tokens clustered around this information if it's in there. I can tell you that when I was trying to search for an image of the Nancy Temple's email, Gemini, Google's AI, gave me a suggestion for how to rewrite that email in a way I can show it to you real quickly because it's on the. Oh no, I can't. Maybe at the end of the session I can show that. But so it was interesting in that it was suggesting me ways to rewrite that email, which would be more directly communicative. Which is, I mean, that's the reason I'm so fascinated with it, is because it's an email that the courts have decided mean exactly the opposite of what it says. Yeah, but beyond that, I would just say that anytime you're looking for something in particular in these models, you're going to be directed towards it, and so it even if it might be a very tiny, almost insignificant part of the broader corpus, if you're searching it out, you will find it.
Okay, thank you. So now we'll go on to our second talk. Okay, yes, thank you. Okay, so Atreya, I think the mic should be working, right? There, okay.
All right, that is working. All right, hello everybody. It's really great to be here and to see all of you in person. I'm Atreya Mathur. I work as the Director of Legal Research at the Center for Art Law, and I'm very excited to present a little bit about legal and ethical considerations when we're dealing with AI-generated art. So the images that you see on the screen right now, I used Llama AI, that's Meta AI, to create them. And you might be able to recognize some of the artwork that you see inside the images as well. I used very specific prompts from different artists, including Starry Night and Van Gogh, and I incorporated them into this image. Now, lots of legal, and once again, I highlight lots of ethical considerations when we're dealing with this. I've created these images, but who owns the work? Who is the author of the work? What can I do with it? And is it legal or is it unethical for me to have used prompts which specify the works of other artists in order to create these? So I'm going to be discussing a bit about all of this, and you'll see that why it's very important to stress upon the fact that this discussion at this stage can just be based on what is happening in the legal sphere. AI is developing at such a rapid pace. It's a lot faster than the decisions and the lawsuits that we're hearing at courts. So it becomes important to bring in an ethical discussion as well to understand the best practices for artists, for the tech industry, and for lawyers and policymakers as well. Just as a very quick note, all of the information today is educational. It doesn't amount to any legal advice or legal opinion, and there's no attorney-client relationship formed from any of the discussion. Now, I thought I could begin with a bit of an example to help us understand why creativity, why innovation, and why things like ownership, authorship, and copyright become so important. Just at an exhibit earlier this year, I came across this poetry camera. And this camera, it's your regular Polaroid camera, but when you look at it, and when you take a photo with the camera, it doesn't print out a picture. It actually prints out a poem that's based on the image that it captures. And the creators of this poetry camera, Caroline Zhang, they stated that they ultimately want to make this poetry camera accessible to everybody, that everybody should have access to being able to create with this machine and with AI, and to have a do-it-your-own, do-it-yourself camera so that you can code and you can configure GPT to change the kind of poems that you want to generate. And I thought that this is an interesting example of seeing how we are supposed to encourage innovation, how we're supposed to foster creativity, but a balance has to be drawn. Now, if I have this poem and I've taken this photo with this camera, do I own this? Can I post it anywhere and say that it's my poem? Does it belong to the AI software that created it, or does it belong to the creators of the AI software? These are just a few of the many, many questions that come up. And I hope to focus on a couple of them. I know that we have limited time, so in case we can't cover all of them, hopefully in a discussion we can talk about it more, and feel free to reach out to me. Some of the things that I do hope to discuss are the authorship and ownership concerns, as I mentioned. Who owns these works right now? And is there an author of any of the works? That means if something is created, do I have the rights to use it? Do you have the right to use it? Does it belong to anybody? And why is this so important? Why am I so concerned with who has the rights over to these? The next is about training, infringement, and fair use. Now, we know that these images and this artwork and even poems, they're all being generated by AI. How? We heard a little bit about these training sets. How legal, how ethical is training data? Where is all of this data coming from? Is that from works that belong to other people? Is that from works that are already copyright protected? So if they are, how do we go about that? What is legal, what is ethical, and what can artists do to protect their work better? And is the final output that's produced by these AI softwares, is that different enough? Is that transformative enough from the original works that were inputted into the software? Would that be something we call fair use? There are lots of other questions as well, like if you create in the likeness of a certain artist, what you had seen earlier, me adding Van Gogh's work into the images, into the work in itself. Is that legal? Is that ethical? Is that protected? There are other issues too, like data privacy, retention, racial bias in training, but I may not be able to get to all of that. I do hope to help you have more questions or have more questions in mind on what are we going to see next. What are we going to see in terms of copyright office regulations? Who is going to be allowed to protect the work? What is going to be protected? What are we seeing already in terms of class action lawsuits, of just lawsuits left, right, and center being filed against a lot of these big tech and AI companies? To start right from the top then, and I know those are a lot of questions, and I am afraid that I may leave you with more questions than answers given the nature of this session, but I do want to cover copyright authorship and ownership. Now, the reason why this is so important, it becomes essential to understand what copyright is. So copyright, it's a form of intellectual property. Intellectual property is a creation of your mind. So actually, the minute I create something, the minute I put pen to paper, and if I draw a really bad sketch right now, or if I write a really cheesy poem, no matter how bad it is, I own copyright to that, regardless of me not having registered it anywhere. That is my work, it's my creation, I have copyright over it. However, if I register the work, and this becomes incredibly important, that is the only way I would ever be able to file a lawsuit in federal court. If the work is not registered, my claim would not stay in court. So while copyright registration isn't mandatory, and regardless of registering it or not, you have all of these exclusive rights to reproduce the work, to publish the work, perform the work, create derivatives of the work. You can do all of that without registering it. But if somebody is infringing your work and you want to take action against them in federal court, you are going to have to register copyright in that work. So why am I talking about this in relation to AI? Because when does work get copyright protected? When does copyright subsist in artwork? Once you have a work of art, it needs to have an author in order for copyright protection to be met. The requirements are that it needs to be an original work of authorship. It has to be fixed in a tangible medium of expression. It can't be an idea that you protect. It has to be expressed in some sort of way. And it has to have a minimal amount of creativity. And we call that a modicum of creativity. So you can see that these requirements, they're not as as tight as you think that they would be. It has to be very minimal creative. It just has to be lasting for more than a transitory duration, and it needs to have an author to it. So who is an author of a work? While there's no definition in the Copyright Act, which governs copyright in the US, we do have different cases and precedents that tell us who an author is. And one of the best cases to go about this is the Naruto case, which you must have heard. Now, David Slater, he was a British wildlife photographer, and what he did is that he left a camera unattended, and an extremely handsome monkey named Naruto, he took the camera and started taking these striking selfies of himself. David Slater, like all of us, were quite impressed with it, and he took these photos that the monkey had taken, both selfies and other photos as well, and he compiled it into a book, and he published it. Now, PETA, the People for Ethical Treatment of Animals, they got really upset about this. They're like, hey, you know, we filed a complaint. You can't do that. Naruto should have the same rights to his monkey selfies as any other author usually has. But of course, the Copyright Office, they did not take to this, and they said that right now, only human authors can be afforded protection. So I will let you know what exactly they stated that guides the conversation on AI. They said that they would refuse to register a claim if it determines that a human being did not produce the work. They further said that they would exclude works produced by machine or mere mechanical process that operates randomly or automatically without any creative input or intervention from a human author. So now we know that only human authors can be considered authors for the purpose of copyright, but they have stated that it has to be automatic and there shouldn't be any creative input or intervention from a human author. So how much creativity is needed on behalf of the human author if they're working with artificial intelligence to produce a work? A great example to go through is Zarya of the Dawn. If you aren't too familiar with this, Zarya of the Dawn, it's a graphic novel. It was created by an artist, Chris Casanova. And as I mentioned, it's a graphic novel. It's a comic, so it has pictures and it has graphics and it has little comic strips and words. Now, what the artist did is she created the images that you see with AI using Midjourney, and she had written the text for the comic by herself. Now, when she applied to get this work registered with the Copyright Office, she received full protection over the work. But later, the Copyright Office rescinded that protection, and they stated that they would protect only the work that was created by the human author. So the images that you see, they are not going to be protected, but the text that she had written as the human author would be. So they came up with a couple of guidelines for us to understand. The first thing that they stated is that the author has to be human. And it is going to be a case-by-case basis to see whether a work which contains AI-generated material, whether it was simply a mechanical reproduction, or if there was actually an author's mental conception to it. They also said that if the traditional elements of authorship were produced by that machine, if you just entered a prompt and let AI generate the image, then the Copyright Office would not register the work because there is no creative control by that human user. So just having influence would not be enough. So those images that I showed you at the beginning of the presentation, even though I feel like I worked really hard on them, I would not be able to get those copyright protected because I simply entered those text prompts, and that would not suffice for copyright registration. What the Copyright Office did state, which is really important, that while the images in itself wouldn't be copyright protected, the selection and arrangement of the text that the artist used along with the images, that would receive copyright protection, but only the elements that the human added and not the underlying AI-generated content. And finally, something that they reiterated is that if you are applying for copyright registration for any work, and if it includes AI-generated material, you must disclose that it is AI-generated content and which parts are AI-generated and how the human created the work too. So this artist, Chris Casanova, who created Zarya of the Dawn, She got very upset with that. She's like, I thought I put in so much hard work, so much effort, and that should be protected. But it's time to test what the Copyright Office considers creative or not. So she produced Rose Enigma. Now, what she did differently for Rose Enigma is that she had her own image, which she inputted into the software, and then she added, of course, very specific prompts, a cyborg woman with flowers coming out of the head. She controlled a lot of the other CFG scale number. She controlled the depth, a whole bunch of little things. And the attorneys who filed for copyright registration for the work, what they stated is that this should receive copyright protection because essentially, and I'll quote what they stated, is that the artist had forced the software to produce her mental conception of the artwork. And I wish I could give you more answers for this right now, but this is pending registration, and we still don't have an answer of whether this is going to receive copyright protection. But going by how a lot of these registrations have gone, and right now I won't go into many more, but if the ultimate output seems produced by artificial intelligence and the substance of it is, it likely would not receive copyright registration at this point. What can receive copyright registration if we're just thinking about artificial intelligence and how to go about that? There's another artist who I had the pleasure of speaking with. Her name is Colleen Hoffenbacher, and she created two works, Region and Florigen. And you'll see on the top left, these were AI designs that had been produced by AI with her text prompts. And when she generated these, she was very inspired by them, and she ultimately created work inspired by artificial intelligence using oil paintings, pastels, aluminum sheets, and a whole bunch of things. And that's what you see on the right side, and a detailed version of it on the lower left side. She received copyright protection for this work, of course, because it was created by human hand, human materials, but it was inspired by AI. So it's interesting to see if you reverse a couple of things around, what you're able to get protection from when you're thinking of using artificial intelligence for certain works. So now you know from what we have discussed so far that at this time, authorship is not granted to artificial intelligence, and only a human author can receive copyright protection over artwork or any type of work that is produced. So that is great. We have copyright protection, but who ultimately owns these works? And I think it's important to understand the distinction between authorship and ownership for the purpose of copyright. So authorship, it refers to the creator of the work, an artist, a painter, a sculptor, a writer. They are the ones who created the work, so they're the authors of the work. The owner is the person who can exercise rights and controls over the work. Now, in most cases, the author is also the owner of the work, but in some cases, like a work for hire, an employer-employee agreement, and of course, if you have licensed your work to some other party, then you no longer own a couple of those bundle of rights that you have. You can transfer ownership, or you can transfer a couple of rights, license these rights to another entity so that they can maybe produce it better. Very commonly, we see that from book to movie adaptations. The author may not be the best person to create a movie, so those rights are licensed. What happens in the case of AI works? We know that there's no human authorship, but every time you're using these platforms in order to create work, you're actually entering into a contract. So it becomes really important when you are working with these softwares and these websites, because these are click wrap agreements, which means that in order for you to use it, you are agreeing to the terms, and a lot of us don't actually read what those terms are. So what exactly are we agreeing to when we're using a couple of these sites? I could create a version of Klimp's The Kiss, and you'll see the original on the left, and you see just a fun reproduction of a version of that by using DALL-E on the right. Now, according to the terms of use of some of these softwares, and I'll use OpenAI right now because this is DALL-E, I own the rights to this work. Now, they don't mention copyright specifically at all and intellectual property rights for good reason, but they do say that all of the rights and interests in this work are with the person who's inputting the text prompt. So this means that I have the right to do whatever I want with this work. I can commercialize it, I can merchandise it, I have actually a couple of the works that I really liked. I printed them out on canvas and I hung them in my room. But if I wanted to, I could print them on tote bags and I could sell them. And I could technically do that legally by contract with the contract that I have with OpenAI and with DALL-E when I'm using this platform. But along with all of the rights, there usually are liabilities that come along with it. It's important to know that all of these websites and all of these tech companies are regularly updating their terms of use. So you have to be very vigilant on what you're agreeing to and to see the updates in terms of use. Initially, what happened with OpenAI is that when I created this work, along with getting all of the rights and interest to the work, if I was sued by a third party, or if the ultimate output that was produced was infringing on the work of another person, saying that, hey, that looks extremely similar to my work, I'm going to sue you for copyright infringement, I would be liable for that. And they wouldn't be able to sue OpenAI, they would want to sue me because I created that output, and that's the liability that I had. So some companies like OpenAI have been very smart about that to want to protect their users. And recently they introduced a copyright shield, which means that if a third party sues the person who's inputting these text prompts and creating that output, if a third party sues you for infringement when you're using OpenAI software to generate this artwork, then OpenAI is going to cover all of the litigation costs. And that is a really huge thing. And it's great for people who are excited about using AI and this technology. But what about the artists who are upset that it looks similar to their work? It makes it even more difficult for them to file any cases to consider this because they are not able to handle the costs and legal burden of these very expensive copyright and intellectual property infringement suits. But you will see that at this stage, people don't really care about the text prompters. We are seeing lawsuits and class action lawsuits against these companies like OpenAI because it's difficult to find instances of infringement. But I mentioned this for you to know what the terms are for a lot of these platforms. OpenAI, now they state that the person who's inputting the text prompts, they retain ownership rights in both the input, that's the text prompt or images that they put into the system to have something produced with it, as well as the output that's generated. Midjourney, for example, what they state, and this is very important, is that when you're using this platform, you're also giving Midjourney a really broad license to use your text prompts, your inputs, and any output that's created. So you can work really hard and have 500,000 prompts, and likely you still won't get copyright protection for it. But despite that, Midjourney can use your prompts and they can use your images for anything else as well. Because there is no copyright protection, everything you're producing anyway, it's sort of in the public domain. Those images that you saw that I created earlier, while I would be very sad if people started using them often, you actually can use them. I don't own them and I don't have copyright over them. But that's just something to consider when you're working with these platforms, the rights that you have, what you're licensing, and what your liabilities are. An artist had reached out to us, Kelly McKernan, and her name might be very familiar. She is a digital artist, and she was one of the plaintiffs on a class action lawsuit. And I was speaking with her, and she was mentioning how excited she was to collaborate with artificial intelligence. And she said that she's really looking forward to work with it, and she's trying to see what else she can create. And one day on Instagram, somebody tagged her in a post saying, "Hey, I absolutely love your artwork here." And it wasn't hers. And that's when she was very surprised that the work that was being generated was generated in her style and in her likeness. And there was really nothing she could do about it. And she got to know that her name was on haveibeentrained.com. And we actually had her for a conference sometime. And while she was talking about all of these issues, my friend who was sitting front row very shamelessly in 30 seconds generated images on Midjourney in the style of her. And it took like 15 seconds. And he was able to create a panel of 6 works, which you see over here. And this is not similar to her original work, which you see on the right-hand side, but it's similar to another series she had. Just as a note, so you can understand how important copyright registration is, though not mandatory, her claims were ultimately dismissed in court because her work wasn't copyright registered. And all of the other artists whose work was registered, they were able to proceed to the next stage of the lawsuit. There are a lot of other issues that we're seeing in terms of data scraping and infringement. When you have these data sets and you have all of this content like Lion 5P that was mentioned earlier, a study was covered to see where all of these works were coming from. And Lion 5P, for example, it was Pinterest, it was social media, and very much copyrighted works. So all of those copyrighted works that belong to other artists, other creators, and other people, that was used to train these data sets. So artists were obviously very upset. On different sites like you had Lensa AI that created these magic avatars. When these images were generated, you would see that there was a mangled signature on the top left, on the bottom, and people were like, my goodness, that's how you know that it's stealing people's work and producing the signatures. But another side of the whole conversation was that you haven't been able to find whose signatures these are exactly. AI is figuring out that for portraits, you usually have a signature and it's creating its own. So it's important to see that what is infringement, what is fair use, are the ultimate outputs that are being produced. Is that infringement? Is that fair use? How much of this work is being directly copied and fed into the system? I am running very much out of time now, so I might discuss some of this during the question and answer session, but I won't go into any of this. I will say that a big lawsuit, New York Times versus OpenAI, which I hope to discuss. Fair user infringement, we'll get into the details at some point. The way forward, I will say, we are going to continue seeing artificial intelligence. So it is going to exist, but the way forward is an ethical and collaborative approach. Hopefully we can discuss best practices for artists, attorneys, tech companies, and what we'll see. Refik Anadol's piece at MoMA is a great example of work that is a collaborative use of AI. And finally, I'll just conclude with this side when people are like, ChatGPT is going to take over your job. Take it. But also, humans doing the hard jobs at minimum wage, while robots and AI, they get to have poetry and paint. That isn't the future I wanted. So lots more to discuss. Very sorry with the time. Sorry about that. Thank you so much.
I was curious to get an update on what's happening with the New York Times.
Sure thing. So a lot of the claims with New York Times, they are proceeding. I'll just quickly say that one of the newest developments that we are seeing with this lawsuit in comparison to others, which we haven't seen, is that OpenAI, what New York Times has been able to produce, are actual instances of infringement. So previously, we were able to see the output, which was slightly transformative. And a lot of these tech companies, their defense has been fair use, that the work, you're training the work and it's creating something different, something transformative that's not based on what we're seeing earlier. And a very good example of this would be the Google case of the thumbnails. And what happened with that case is that when you search for anything on Google, you have small images that are in the thumbnails. And ultimately, Google was sued for that, saying, hey, you're copying all of these works, you're copying all of these images. But Google was not liable because what they had done is that they copied the URLs and the text, and they didn't reproduce the images at all. And it was directing that image to the actual site. So Google wasn't liable for that. Now, it was very difficult in all of the previous class action lawsuits and lawsuits that we're seeing where you're able to actually show that this work has been directly reproduced and copied. But New York Times was able to show that verbatim language and text was used not only from their articles that were behind paywalls, but also from interviews, from how-to guides, and a lot of the work that they had done. And it was they said it's destroying the integrity of journalism as well, if you're able to produce what is verbatimly included. A defense that OpenAI stated is that you really aren't able to access that unless you put in the information or you've hacked into OpenAI's system in order to get the verbatim language. But we're yet to see what is going to happen with the case. OpenAI is going to continue with the fair use argument, most likely. Sam Altman, who is the creator of OpenAI, I will say that he made a very incriminating statement saying that, hey, of course we have to copy all of this work in order to get the results. So that is something to keep in mind. I will also say very quickly that the US, the Constitution, and in the clause which is for intellectual property and copyright, it does say that the whole point of intellectual property and copyright is to work towards fostering the improvement and progress of science and the arts apart from granting economic rights. So don't hold me to this, but I think, and don't quote me at all, but I feel like a lot of what we will see is that there'll be fines and very high damages that these companies will have to pay, but very likely that these courts might go to want these companies to continue developing AI software and products, but a lot of best practices and a lot of fines and damages that would be incurred and fined. Sorry.
Thanks, Atreya. Thank you. By the way, I disagree with some of the things you said. Sorry. I think the New York Times is going to lose their case against OpenAI. I think all of the processes of training a model is 100% unquestionably transformative, and therefore it's fair use. We can have that debate in overtime. Thank you all. My name is Todd Brous. I'm going to be double handing this because I got my slide notes here and the slides are over here. So bear with me while I go through that. We're going to talk about agentic AI. And the goal for this session is to kind of educate you and give you a general overview of some of the what's going on and how this is going to affect all of our lives. So a little bit about me. My name is Todd Brous. I'll be your Cruz director for this evening, for today. I'm a serial entrepreneur. I've been in technology consulting for a long time. I've run a bunch of companies. I advise a number of startups in AI and other industries. But I currently teach at another institution, the School of Visual Arts. My class is called AI for Creatives, Strategies for Success. Please take my class. So a little context. We're in the age of AI. I'm hoping that everybody here has played with ChatGPT. Everyone, have you never played with ChatGPT? You've never played with ChatGPT? Okay, all right. So like there's a quiz on Friday. So you know what it is. So the homework actually for everyone in the room is you need to start to use these tools daily. It is absolutely a requirement. If you're an artist and we have other types of tools other than large language models like ChatGPT, these are technically called diffusion models. So Midjourney, DALL-E, those are two of the prime examples. So I do hope that everyone takes this seriously because we are in a new age, and it's the age of artificial intelligence. So what does all this mean? I like to quote one of my professors, Kareem Lakhani. He said that the marginal cost of cognition and creativity is dropping to $0. And I ask my students, what exactly does that mean? The marginal cost of cognition is $0. The marginal cost of creating something is $0. Yes, that is the world we live in right now. And the example that Kareem gave was that, with the invention of the internet, that it costs us marginally nothing to send an email or send a video or have a Zoom conference globally or a photo across the world. Now, historically, well, if we wanted to send some information, we would have to put it in an envelope or ship it overseas. It took a lot of time and a lot of money to move information. Today, with the internet, information costs nothing to send globally. Now, apply that concept of it costing us nothing to understanding anything, to creating anything. This is a new world. So here's a slide that I created to kind of explain this concept of the marginal cost of cognition and creativity is dropping to $0. So on the vertical axis, we have the cost. And on the horizontal axis, oh, by the way, I have some stickers. I think I have stickers of this later. I hope I brought them. I might have forgotten them at home. But on the horizontal axis is cognition and creativity, and the vertical axis is cost. So the blue line, which is artificial intelligence, this is where it costs us nothing over time to create something. That blue line on the lower right-hand side, that's where we are right now. Now with humans, that's the green line. Over time, it's expensive for us to understand and create things. We're born. We learn to crawl, we learn to walk, we learn to speak, we go to school, we get a job, we go back to school, we get another job, we go back to school again. We learn. It takes us time and effort and energy and money to become proficient, to create something and understand. Now, compare that to AI. Now, there's another thing that's really interesting. Imagine the world of humans with AI. Well, that's the red dotted line. This is where we have a reduction in costs of cognition and creativity. The question that's not completely clear is how low does this curve drop? But I also want you to I also need to point out that there's a difference between a human with AI. Humans with AI still cost more than just the AI. This is very powerful. So again, I asked my students to explore, what does this universe look like? The universe that we live in right now. What does that look like? What happens to the economy? What happens to work? What happens to education? What happens to art? What happens to design? Now, I don't have a clear answer, and that's what everyone here has to really help figure out. But this is something that I absolutely love discussing. And over time, we've discovered that this cost of humans with AI is actually coming down a little bit further, but it's still more than just AI. So humans will cost more to understand something and create something than just the AI. Is that what I'm saying? Yeah, that's kind of what I'm saying. So there's a bunch of stuff that's going on right now with AI, and these are some of the chapters from a book that I'm writing. But I want to talk about the first four: augmentation effects, replacement effects, transformation effects, and acceleration effects. And again, these are things that Kareem talks about. These are not all of my own ideas. I am regurgitating and repurposing other people's concepts. So full credit. But the augmentation effects, this is again the humans with AI. So the generative AI tools that can enhance our productivity by assisting us with tasks and increasing our efficiency and the output of what we're able to do, the quality of our work. Ideally, this should free us up to focus on more strategic areas of our work. Then there's the replacement effects. This is the automation of tasks directly leading to the replacement of jobs. This occurs when generative AI systems fully take over the tasks that were previously performed by us. And then this is the job displacement that we've seen. Now, we've seen this before. This is throughout history. This is not new. We've seen this through the Industrial Revolution. Machines and robots take over assembly line jobs. It's not new. These are not the droids you're looking for. Move along. And yes, this leads to massive improvements and greater efficiencies and lower costs for businesses. And it does raise concerns about unemployment, and we should be aware of this. And it requires us to think about reskilling workers who have been or will be very soon displaced by these technologies. So third is the transformation effects. This is the stuff that makes me drool. I love the transformation effects. In fact, I'm struggling to encourage my students and the people I speak to about what this means. What are these transformations? This is the creation of entirely new tasks, new jobs, new roles, new business models, new industries, and entirely new ecosystems that will all arise due to generative AI. And this fundamentally changes the nature of work, the economy, and guess what? The society that we live in. Like, we're looking at a world, I mean, the one that I'm trying to build is kind of like a Star Trek utopia where we have a whole new social agreement with humans and society. I mean, positive, amazing things that are within our grasp, quite frankly. And then the fourth one is the acceleration effects. I'll sum this up really quickly because I'm running out of time already. It's just moving really, really fast. And humans have a lot of trouble understanding and conceptualizing exponentials. I've got a whole talk on exponential concepts. We're going to skip that. All right. So, oh, wait, I just realized I'm not even updating all of my slides. I'm sorry. There was another slide. So I had this yellow slide, this yellow-orange arrow was the reduction. And these are the chapters from my upcoming book. 2 hands, Todd. 2 hands. All right. So those were the chapters from my book: augmentation effects, replacement effects, transformation effects, and acceleration effects. So where are we now? The AI bomb has already exploded, and many of us just haven't been hit by that blast wave yet. And there's this anticipation, this anxiety, this like, I see these things happening, and it's not comfortable for me, for my students, for many of the people in the arts that I work with. I don't understand. And yes, this is uncomfortable. The blast wave has gone off. We just haven't been hit by it yet. Bomb has gone off. We just haven't been hit by it. So, and some positive stuff here. In the age of AI, the only future where we thrive is through our human relationships. It is absolutely fundamental that we build and maintain and strengthen our human communities, because AI is going to completely transform the way we exist in this planet, for in very good ways. I hope that this is coming across as like being positive and optimistic and not completely pessimistic and doomsaying, because I am an optimist deep inside me. I can't talk about artificial intelligence without a little Gartner hype cycle, because there's a lot of hype, there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of, oh my God, this is so cool, but like, what's it going to mean? This was just published July 31st of 2024. One of my friends, I don't know why I have this in my notes, like, you can't spell fail without AI, and I thought that was really funny, so I put that in my slide notes. But again, artificial intelligence, and one of the things I'm going to get to, here's this multi-agent systems that I highlighted here. Now, so where are we? It's like, oh, the trough of disillusionment. Well, my concern is, and I found a great blog post from this gentleman, Steve Pettit. He talks about this never-ending peak of inflated expectations. Because we're in an accelerating world, I think he might be spot on with this concept of overlap the Gartner hype cycle over and over and over again, and you're going to see we're just going from peak to peak to peak to peak, faster and faster and faster. I just thought that this was really good. Kudos to Steve Pettit for thinking this way. Now, when it comes to intelligence and jobs and stuff like that, Bill Joy, this is Joy's law. He used to work for Sun Microsystems. No matter who you are, most of the smartest people work for someone else. I love this quote. It affects everything that all of my research. However, in the age of AI, I'm going to quote Mo Gaudat, the smartest person you can hire is not a human. The smartest person you can hire isn't human right now. And so if you run a business, if you exist in an organization and you have a job, you need to think about this. If you're the CEO of a business, wow, this is incredibly compelling. And many of the CEOs, many of the people that I interact with are well aware of this, and they're taking action accordingly. We've also, one of the other misconceptions about AI is, Ethan Malik, he's got a great book, you have to read this, Co-Intelligence, A Living and Working with AI, must read. There's a misconception that artificial intelligence can't create new things, that because it's trained on previous data, it's only regurgitating what it was trained on. And there is some truth to that, but it's getting better. And I like this quote because it says, like, most new ideas do not come from the ether. They are based on combinations of existing concepts. We as artists completely resonate with that concept. Yeah, I'm inspired by all these other artists and all these other things. Oh, I really like that. Oh, I really don't like that. So I'm gonna, and I'm gonna just get inspired, and I'm going to create my own thing. With these tools, we as artists now we get superpowers. And like, my students are doing that. Like their homework assignments, create images, create content with AI. And they're just like, last night's assignment was movie posters with Halloween. So take a different movie, make it into a horror movie. It was like, wow. Beautiful stuff. So again, combinations of existing concepts, things that we did not think were possible. So AI can absolutely create new ideas. Some prerequisites for what I'm going to talk about, I'm going to start my talk right now, is really about agentic AI. And let me see if this works. Yeah. I should wrap up. All right. Well, then I'm going to skip all of the videos because I didn't really get to the good stuff. All right. Here's the important stuff. What is an agent? Agentic AI is where, let me go back to this prompting LLM. So you've done ChatGPT, you've done large language models, you prompt it, you get some output. The agentic AI is now, we're giving these AI tools memory and additional tools where they can actually behave and do bigger and better things. You can give an agent a mission or a goal, and it will go do it. Now imagine these agents in the same way you would say, I'm going to go hire a team of creatives, an executive producer, a creative director, a bunch of designers, a brand manager, and I'm going to go make an advertising campaign. I can now do that with no humans needed. I mean, I might need some oversight. That's the idea here. This is a slide from a tool called Cruz AI. This is for coders. This is for people who like to program things, but this is a general concept of what we're talking about here. You can see these agents are having conversations with each other, a sequential chat, a nested chat, a group chat, a hierarchical chat. So the same way humans would interact with each other, we now have these AI agents doing the same thing. I have a video here, but I'm not going to be able to have time to do that, so I'm just going to skip it. Again, so reflection, tool use, planning, multi-agent collaboration, this is what the agents perceive, so they can see the world, they can think, and they can take action autonomously on our behalf. And then the perception, action, execution, reasoning, and decision-making, and the learning and adaptation. They can all do all of these things. They're not perfect, but they're pretty good. This is a slide from a paper about mixture of agents. So again, imagine taking multiple agents and asking them to collaborate and doing things together, and it works. I'll just end this with the risks. So I just want to say this, there are absolutely no risks whatsoever to any of this. It's all going to be fine. So we're not going to talk about any risks. We could spend hours and hours and days and semesters talking about the potential risks for all of this. Lastly, I need to just point this out. There are tons of reports and papers that I use as my source. This is an important paper from Anton Koronek. He's out of University of Virginia, Darden. Please read this paper. Download this, find this, Google it. Scenarios for the transition to artificial general intelligence. He talks about how job displacement and value is going to transfer globally. These are some of the images of his analysis. You have this business as usual scenario. The green is the money, the red is the capital. And if you'll notice that there's a potential collapse of the green in 2 or 3 of these scenarios that he has predicted. So very important paper. It is very academic-y. But I'll just wrap this up with, in the age of AI, the only future, well, this is the same slide, but lastly, AI won't replace humans. Humans with AI will replace humans without AI. It's very, very important to keep that in mind. We currently value IQ. We're going to be valuing EQ. It's not going to be about what you know. It's about who you know and how you interact with them. It's about the people. If you think or if you create for a living, then your current job will eventually be replaced by a human using AI. That's the bad news. The good news is, and this is the learning outcome from my class, and I show this slide to my students every week. Humanity will not run out of problems to solve anytime soon, and it falls upon us as artists, as leaders, as entrepreneurs, and as business people, and whatever we do, to find those problems in the world, use AI, find your friends, and go solve those problems. That's it. This is from a friend of mine, Steve Rader. He works at NASA. Genius. And keep in mind the art of the possible. People get stuck in their bubbles, in their boxes. Try and think about ways to get out of that. How can we go beyond what we currently do with AI? That universe is within grasp. And that is the last slide I have. But please do connect with me on LinkedIn. Thank you.
Okay, so we have
Here we
10
go.
minutes left, but I'm going to give, if there's any specific question about Todd's talk, it's
I had a little comment about one of the graphs that you showed, the one I think it was by Stephen. Maybe can we go to that?
Which
I would
graph?
like the one that was by someone named Steve.
A graph.
Yeah. That one,
Oh,
perfect.
oh, this
Steve
one, yeah.
Petit, thank you. And that has to do a lot with the risks and the kind of reading that you gave to us that has like a very specific kind of projection of hype. And you mentioned that this is the never-ending peak of inflated expectations.
Yes.
And I find that so interesting because if it were actually a never-ending peak, it would be a flat line at the top. And it's not, right? So we could also read it as a never-ending valley, a never-ending low point, right? And that has to do a lot, I think, with the way that these systems are sold to us. And I understand that maybe this is part of the talk, like I don't know, it has a little bit of a sales pitch to it. And I would just remind that the risk is to just stay with that understanding and to actually look into the systems and to look into the data. However biased it may be, is showing that actually, sure, could be okay, but the information is there and could be not okay.
So
Just as
I'm not sure I understand what your question is.
I said, it was a comment.
Oh, okay, sorry.
And the slide is not there anymore, but we could see it. And even here, yeah, exactly. It's like a never-ending low point as well, right?
Correct. But that, again, that's because technologies are being replaced. That's, it doesn't work, so we move on and something else replaces it.
Speculative. It's wishful thinking.
I disagree, but yeah, that is part of my warning to you that these agentic workflows are going to go exponential. They are exponential, but yeah.
See from the data.
Well, this isn't, by the way, this isn't data driven, this slide, okay, just to be clear. Gardner is data driven, but his hypothesis was that, because of the time crunch, that maybe this is what we're happening. But I do like your idea. I'd like that you're pointing out that there's this trough, this never ending trough of disillusionment. Yeah. Next question.
Thank you for your presentation. I was struck by a few different things, and I'm going to try to sort of put them all together in one question. I guess ultimately it's what is new and what is new about AI? Why do you say we're in a new age, an age of AI? AI has been around since the 1940s. What's new about this AI?
Question.
Okay, but you also said a few other things that were really striking. I mean, you said, for example, generative AI can create new ideas. What's your evidence for that? You also talked about AI being actually producing creativity and cognition.
Yes.
Because these are simply tools doing arithmetic.
No,
I don't
actually-
see how that is an example of cognition or what you call creativity. I'm also really curious about what you mean by ideas. And again, also newness, because newness is a very modern concept, right?
Huh, okay.
The etymology of the modern goes back to German new time.
I don't know much about the etymology of the word new. I really come from this perspective of entrepreneurship and engineering and that kind of stuff. And but
I get you. Well,
yeah.
well, just to put it an even finer point on that, I'm really doubtful about these claims about AI. I mean, for one, like creating ideas, for one.
Yes.
Because I'm also doubtful about whether humans can have genuinely new ideas. I think the problems are actually intertwined, right? I mean, David Graeber puts it interestingly when he says, we wanted flying cars and we got 128 characters or less. I think Peter Thiel actually said something very similar around the same time. But I think what that sort of gets at is a fundamental character of our moment, right? Which is, I think, a somewhat arguably of a mutation, not necessarily beyond, but that relates to the modern, but we're no longer in that moment exactly as such. And I think the fact that we have all coalesced around this sort of incredible fantasy of a machine that we think of as producing new things, but is actually simply a matter of a conglomeration of existing things.
I agree with the conglomeration of existing things up to a point, and it's the point when these agentic technologies have been deployed into production environments and they're capable of actually generating new information. They are capable, hold on, we're there today.
The evidence.
Okay.
I mean, producing derivative mid-journey.
No, okay, I'm not talking about that. Okay, research, okay? Where? Okay, this is uncomfortable, but I'm just going to tell you the truth. You can deny it, You can argue against it, you can resist it, but I need you to be prepared because we as artists and creatives are the canary in the coal mine. I remove that slide. Okay, we are the first in line to be disrupted by these technologies. Now, in terms of research, in terms of new data, okay, because Ethan Malik says most new ideas do not come from the ether, they're based on a combination of existing ideas. Large language models specifically are capable of bringing connections to disparate concepts better than any human. It is basically capable of understanding, literally that word, in a latent space of knowledge more than any human can. They are smarter than all of us. You're shaking your head. Unfortunately, I have bad news for you. I really have bad news for you. And so, I'm sorry? Get her a microphone, please. Please get her a microphone. Anyway, we're out of time. Yeah.
On now. Yeah, Zach's here as well. So I actually think that this would be an interesting thing to hear from all of the panelists on, right? And there's two kind of things which have shown up here, like a new things actually being created, right? And then part of that is like, what's the limitations of what these models are being trained on in terms of like what these new, whether they're new or not.
Now, if in terms of new,
Data.
okay, and again, I don't know what your definition of new, but my definition of new is if I make a prompt into Midjourney, it creates any image. That is an arrangement of pixels that has never existed in the history of the universe. If you want to change your definition of new, fine, we can have that debate later. But that to me is new. Now, the question is it useful? Well, that depends. And therein lies the disruption that we as designers and artists are going to face in the workforce. Because when you are dealing with a value chain, if I'm creating work and I'm getting money or paid for it, and a company can use AI to create that stuff quickly at near $0, what's my value as a designer? Yes. Are we talking about web banners or art? I'm talking about the web banners and the commercial stuff. The art, the expression of the human, they're fine. The artists are fine. You can use these tools or not. It's never going to affect what you do. And in fact, on the longer curve, which is why I'm so excited about these technologies, on the longer time frame, it is actually the human expression that is the most valuable. It just means that our jobs, what we do as designers from a value capture perspective, is absolutely going away. And if you ask me for the evidence, well, I don't have the time to show it to you. I'm just telling you that it exists, but I can give you a list of dozens of academic papers, hundreds of reports that will unfortunately make you very uncomfortable.
I do have just a couple of comments to make on this too. And I think when we talk about creativity and something that's new, from a legal perspective, and once again, taking it in that direction of copyright, there's a very thin line between inspiration, appropriation, and infringement. And a lot of the courts, with the precedents that we have with copyright lawsuits and cases, is that ultimately artists, people, human appropriate different works, and ideas are not protected under copyright law. It's the expression of a certain idea that is protected. So it's a lot of building up on different types of works, which is one of the biggest issues that we see with these cases. The final output has different variations of artists' works who we may not even know at this point. So that's one of the things I wanted to comment. And very quickly, I'll also add with the newness factor that has been talked about and mentioned. I have tried using various softwares, including ChatGPT. And while it may create, I'd say it does create new content, but it isn't accurate at all. ChatGPT has created several lawsuits and cases that do not exist. So verifying the information and any information that's produced by AI software can be very, very concerning. Sorry.
Yep.
Okay. And then just, sorry, I wanted to give Zach a chance to jump on this before we change topic. If he's...
Oh, great. Thank you so much. Can everyone hear me? Yes? No?
Zach,
Yes?
you're up.
Yep. You're up.
Yeah, so it's really interesting thinking about the conflicting timescales we're talking about when Atreya is talking about the legal system grinding through this and Todd is talking about this burst of innovation. So I did appreciate that. I wanted to return to one of the slides that Todd showed us, this perspective that Well, I do. So I do agree that creative folks are at risk, and that it is much more likely that our livelihoods are going to be disrupted as opposed to people who are mining lithium right now, like in California or in South America. And those jobs, although they're in support of the AI supply chain, there's a kind of difference there that I think is worth theorizing a bit more. But I did want to say that I fully agree with this idea that Todd presented, that new ideas build from previous ones. And what I was trying to point out in my presentation is that I think many of the ideas behind generative AI are deeply indebted to the speculative Ponzi scheme capitalism of Enron, and that troubles me deeply. And so I just think maybe one way to kind of moderate the excitement right now is to look at what Harvard Business School professors were saying about Enron in the 1990s, and just try to ground ourselves a bit more. Yes, so thank you for that.
Zach gets extra credit for tying that in. I completely agree with it. However, I caution anyone to deny the level of exponential changes that these technologies are capable of. You do this at your own risk. So yes, there's hype. There's going to be a crash with this stuff, okay? That doesn't mean that the internet didn't work. We know for a fact that deep neural networks work. Don't deny that.
Okay, we're at 3 o'clock right now, so I just want to get a feel from the. Okay, I can't keep going though because I need to go to grad council. Bye. I'll give it to you.
Thank you. Yeah, don't want to chime in on the accelerationism. I just want to highlight we have here curated a few art pieces. And in the legal aspect, I want to just mention 3 of those that are maybe relevant, or we have here this by Maide, the panelist in the morning, that was prompted in DALL-E. And then here by Lev Manovic, speaker yesterday, and this is in the prompt, he's mentioning Hieronymus Bosch, so that would be definitely legally very hot territory, yeah. So my question then would be basically, since Chris Lowery, the printmaker here in the house, and me, we printed all the prints together. So, and that was potentially a lot of physical labor also, similar to the painting from the, you get the point. Where, at what point is the physical aspect worthy enough to be original?
Thank you for that question. And so interesting to learn more about the artworks here. I was so curious when I entered. But the physical aspect and the physical work that you put in, I wouldn't say that would amount to originality or the creativity aspect that's required for general copyright protection. So in order to understand this a little bit better, we might have to get more into what copyright is and what the originality component in copyright is. So to give you a very quick case example of that is a very old case, Feist Rural Publications, when they said that originality and creativity, even though the modicum of creativity is so low, for example, if you have a white pages or yellow pages of a book, that is there and it exists. And if it hasn't been organized in any way, or if it hasn't been edited in any way, and all of the names are just listed, that's not original and that's not creative. So it doesn't matter about the effort that you had put into in order to put something like that together. However, the selection and arrangement of it, for example, if you had organized that in terms of addresses by a certain style or something of the sort where it's more detailed and the expression of that would be protected. Copyright, at least when you're talking about works that can be protected, the physical aspect of it would not, it generally won't amount to creativity. So there are a lot of cases that I'd be happy to share with you to kind of break down what originality and the creativity component is. But in terms of putting these pieces together, it's ultimately the art that has been created. And I don't know how to explain this much better, but this, let's say all these pieces, it was already generated and you printed it, right? Uh-huh. Okay, because right now I will say that if anything, if the original output, whether it was a digital file, if it was an image or anything of the sort, if it's what you have seen over here in general, that at this point would never be granted copyright protection. However, the images I had shown earlier of Colleen Hoffenbacher, she was inspired by artificial intelligence and the work that was produced. So she built on that by using oil pastels and colors. So ultimately, if the painting, if this was generated as a digital file and then you used oil painting to create that independently as a human author, that is what could be granted copyright protection. So not just printing it, but we can discuss this in more detail later. It's a little nuanced, but
Okay, a lot of questions, and we can go on. Coffee and cookies are coming, so until they come, we can keep going.
Thank you. Thanks. So I had a question. So when I was thinking about the copyright and AI issue, I was thinking, well, but before AI, there was a lot of artwork that's computer generated, that's algorithmically generated, and how would that fall under this same kind of copyright authorship issue? Because ultimately what is AI systems really but algorithmically generated work? So is like there kind of like a primacy given to, or I guess I should say like, if like it's a single person like coding a program that generates something, I think, like at least I always thought like, well, then that programmer would have copyright over the generated work. But now we're saying, well, if we amalgamate into a kind of like AI system and generate the work, then that is not going to be copyrightable. Yeah.
so what you said is 100% true. And that is why we have so many concerned artists and so many concerned digital artists, because the way that they have been producing the work and producing something, it can very well look like it's been AI generated. And that has been their style for a very long time. Now, you usually have to, when you're submitting a registration letter to the Copyright Office, you have various details that you have to fill out in terms of the process on how it was created. And if you're able to show those files and the PSD files for creation, then you would be able to get copyright protection over the certain software, the output as is. The thing is now with the Copyright Office, you need to disclose that the work has been AI generated, but it is not as simple as the statement that I've made at all. Ben Moran, he is a really prominent digital artist, and he was part of this Reddit community and the subreddit community that the goal was to protect human artists and to protect digital artists. And one fine day, the moderator of this community kicked him out, saying that, hey, that's an AI generated work. He's like, no, that is my work. I've been working on this style for ages and ages, and I can send you the original PSD files to show that this work has been created. And I had that slide up, but I went through it very quickly. But the response of the moderator to that was that your style looks so similar to what is being produced by AI. You're either one, going to have to learn, you're going to have to create a new style because it looks like it's been AI generated. And AI can do what you could have done that could have taken days or months for you, it could do it in seconds. And they very rudely kept Ben Moran out of that community and said that your work could be AI generated when it was actually human generated. So just as a note, you can call these digital artists who are creating work and creating these programs and softwares, you do have to show how it is being created. And that is ultimately that process, the Copyright Office, they see in the registration letter what you're protecting. And if AI has not been disclosed, that's granted protection. So, mhm. Mhm. If you've created a system, yeah. So yeah. So softwares, you'll ultimately either have, depending on what you are creating, you will be able to receive copyright protection for a software. You'll see that a lot of the tech companies don't do that. A lot of it is They use open source and they want other people to build on it. OpenAI is a great example of what they're doing with GPT. They want people to play around with it. But in general, the software that you create, that can be copyright protected. But what we're talking about. Mhm. No, 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 no. That won't be, no.
If I create a
Yes.
diffusion model, if I coded and trained a diffusion model and I prompted it to create an image, the image itself would still not be copyrightable.
So that's it. You're talking about two different aspects of copyright protection in terms of subject matter of copyrightability. So there are a lot of things which can't be protected. Software can be copyright protected.
Can I just add
Sorry.
a small thing? Okay. This is super interesting just because I've been thinking about a very similar problem. Essentially, what about algorithmically generated works that are not derivative, right? And a great, wonderful example of this is one of the, it's discussed as the first algorithmically generated poem, which was a collaboration between Alison Knowles and James Tenney. And it's simple, like sort of procedure. It was, I think, 9 different words, which I forget what they were, but you imagine every possible permutation of those 9 words, and that was the poem. So they wrote a program in BASIC, or Jim Tenney wrote a program in BASIC that listed through every possible combination of those 9 words. And they printed it out, and it was a stack of pages up to here, right? So I just think, like, it's important for me, and I think maybe it just, like, is an interesting addition to this conversation, to think about some of these, what we think of as problems that arose a year and a half ago, is actually having a much longer history. And I think, like, a problem like this really gets at the core of, like, what does it mean to use computers to make art, right? I mean, in a sense, you don't need a computer for that work. You need it for the kind of proof of concept for the pages that come out at the end, right? But just to say, okay, here are 9 words, every possible order, right? So in a sense, it gets at that, like, algorithms as a part of a broader kind of AI, if you will, sort of art landscape that I think we've sort of forgotten already. Like, we just think of AI as the generative stuff. And I'm just like, yeah, but there's a longer,
There's a huge history. I love
interesting
that.
history there.
I absolutely love that.
You know what? We're going to go to some more questions. We can keep it up, but it has her hand up for a very long time.
Hi, I just have a question about the Offenbacher example in particular. So her AI generated images are not protected, but her AI inspired oil paintings are. But the terms that one uses on OpenAI are not your own. You had mentioned that once you put terms into OpenAI, those terms can be they're gathered in some way, they're mined by OpenAI, and they're not they're not your own terms.
Huh?
Which is troubling to me, because research is about linking ideas, and so there's something I'm not understanding there. And also in the Ben Morin example, if you have to show the process of a work of art to prove it's yours, what is the problem with his art? He's creating it. AI is not creating it. And just because it's similar to AI, like, to me, that BS. You know, he's creating it, he can back it up, right? Now, I'm not a visual artist, I'm a sound artist, so I'm dealing with a whole other set of stuff, you know, for lack of a better word, in terms of sound copyright and intellectual property of created works that become sound projects or products. So I'm not getting, like, a couple of little nexi here.
Or maybe first with Ben Moran's work. I 100% agree with you. And that was just a Reddit community, and that kind of shows other people's perspectives of it. None of this has been in a court of law. But what you should understand just from that example and how people are perceiving the images is that even though that community, for example, it was created to protect human artists, it was unfortunate that Ben Moran had to go to such a tenacious process to be like, hey, this is my work. So it's important, not from a legal aspect, but just from a community perspective, to be that is the response that somebody who had created a forum to protect artists stated. And 100% that work that he had created, that would be copyright protected. That's independent. Yeah. But the fact that people are saying that is what's concerning. With Colleen Hoffenbacher's work, you said that, yeah, so she had created the work inspired by artificial intelligence. And the prompts that you enter, if you had seen the terms of use through different softwares, it can vary through different about what you're saying. But in general, and you would have to go through, once again, each of the softwares when you are creating to verify. But in general, the owner for the input as well as the output is the person who's entering those text prompts. So technically, by the terms of use that are on the website, I do own the text prompts and I do own the output, not copyright. But they also state that anybody else could have the same text prompts and they would own that too. So it's a very narrow scope and very narrow protection. If somebody else does what Colleen Hoffenbacher did, they would likely have copyright protection over their independent creation. Just because two people have copyright protection over pieces that are similar, it doesn't negate one of them. A great example of this in traditional art is photography. Two people can take two photos of us sitting over here, and both of you would have independent copyright protection in those photographs. So it's a narrow scope of copyright protection that exists, but it subsists nevertheless.
Can I just jump in on that comment? So I do really appreciate connecting to this longer artistic tradition and history of artists using algorithmic generative procedures as part of their practice, and also in Atreya's presentation and some of her publication, looking at artists who are deliberately trying to work the line between imitation, derivation, plagiarism, in the tradition of, like the bad boy artists of Richard Price and Andy Warhol and Jeff Koons and that kind of trajectory. And very much thinking about these artists who are trying to create or co-create with AI and using them as tools. And we're very much focused on whether the product of what they make is in copyright or not. And so that's all great. But I would just encourage everyone in the audience to also engage with this other cluster of artists that I was trying to mention, like Trevor Paglen and Kate Crawford, Mimi Onuohu, Tiga Brain and Sam Levine and Adam Harvey, who are actually engaging with the algorithms, not necessarily to try to produce some end product that's going to be copyrightable or not, but rather exploring the limits of perception, the constitution of these systems. And I think that level of engagement is much more enlightening and illustrative of the promises and the limits of these systems than just trying to like use it as a tool, which is fine. But I do think that there's an entire different realm of artistic experimentation going on that deserves our attention.
Thank you.